As the night fell and the rain started to pour, four teenage girls huddled together outside the gates of the haunted mansion. They had been invited to a sleepover at the abandoned mansion, daring each other to spend the night in what was said to be one of the most haunted places in the country. At first, they had laughed off the warnings and the stories they had heard, but as the night wore on, strange things began to happen, and they quickly realized that they were not alone in the mansion. What started as a fun and exciting adventure turned into a terrifying ordeal that would haunt them for the rest of their lives. This is the story of their sleepover in the haunted mansion and the ghosts that they encountered along the way. Sarah, Emily, Jessica, and Ashley had been best friends since they were little girls. They had grown up together in a small town, always playing together and getting into mischief. As they got older, their interests diverged, but their friendship remained strong. One day, Ashley inherited an old mansion from her grandmother. The mansion had been in their family for generations, and Ashley was excited to finally be the owner. She invited her friends over for a sleepover, eager to show off her new home. The girls arrived at the mansion on a dark and stormy night. The rain was coming down in sheets, and the wind was howling through the trees. As they stepped inside, they were struck by the grandeur of the entrance hall. It was decorated with antique furniture and paintings, and the high ceiling was adorned with a chandelier that sparkled in the dim light. Ashley gave her friends a tour of the mansion, showing them the grand ballroom where they would be sleeping, the dining room where they would be eating, and the library where they could read old books. As they made their way through the mansion, they began to feel a sense of unease. The air was thick, and the musty scent of old books and the creaking of the floorboards made them jump at every sound. As they settled into their sleeping bags in the grand ballroom, they began to hear strange noises. The sound of footsteps echoed through the halls, even though they knew they were the only ones in the house. And as the wind howled inside, they could hear whispers in the darkness. At first, they tried to ignore the sounds and convince themselves that it was just their imagination. But as the night wore on, the noises became louder and more persistent. They heard doors slamming shut, objects moving on their own, and strange shadows flitting across the walls. Jessica was the first to notice that something was not right. She woke up in the middle of the night to find a ghostly figure standing at the foot of her own sleeping bag. It was an old woman, dressed in a flowing white gown, with long gray hair that hung in the tangled strands across her face. Jessica let out a scream, waking up the other girls. They saw the ghostly figure too, and as they huddled together in fear, they began to realize that the mansion was truly haunted. Ashley had not been joking after all. The girls tried to calm themselves down, telling each other that the ghosts weren't real and that it was just a trick of the mind. But then they heard the sound of children laughing, coming from a room down the hall. They hesitated at first, but curiosity got the better of them, and they wanted to investigate. As they entered the room, they saw a group of ghostly children playing with old toys. They were dressed in old-fashioned clothes, and their faces were pale and gaunt. The girls watched in horror as the children began to chant in unison, their voices growing louder and more menacing by the second. The girls tried to run, but the doors slammed shut, trapping them inside. The room grew colder, and the toys began to move on their own. The doll's eyes flickered and followed the girl's movements, and the rocking horse began to creak back and forth, even though no one was riding it. Just as they thought they were going to be trapped in the haunted mansion forever, the door suddenly burst open. Ashley stood in the doorway, holding a lit candle in one hand and a cross in the other. She began to recite a prayer, and the ghostly figures began to dissipate into the thin air. The girls breathed a sigh of relief and quickly gathered their belongings. They ran out of the mansion, not stopping until they were safely outside in the pouring rain. They huddled together under a nearby tree, watching as the mansion disappeared into the darkness. Ashley explained to her friends that her grandmother had told her stories about the haunted mansion when she was a child. It was said that the mansion was cursed, and the ghosts of those who had died there still haunted its halls. Ashley had never believed the stories until now. The girls were shaken, but relieved to be outside in the fresh air. They decided to spend the rest of the night at Emily's house, where they could try to forget about the terrifying experience that they just had. But even as they lay in their sleeping bags at Emily's house, they couldn't shake the feeling that they are being watched. They heard strange noises outside the window, and they could feel a cold breeze blowing through the room. They were sure that the ghost had followed them, determined to hunt them until the end of their days. Over the next few weeks, the girls tried to put the experience behind them. They didn't talk about the haunted mansion or the ghost that had chased them out of it. But they couldn't forget what had happened, and they couldn't shake the feeling that they were being followed. One day, as they were walking home from school, they saw a figure standing in the distance. It was an old woman dressed in a flowing white gown, with long gray hair that hung in tangled strands around her face. They froze in fear, convinced that the ghost had followed them home. But as the figure got closer, they realized that it wasn't a ghost at all. It was an old woman who lived in a nearby retirement home. She smiled kindly at them and asked if they needed any help. The girls breathed a sigh of relief, realizing that they had been letting their fear get the best of them. They had let their imaginations run wild, and they had convinced themselves that the ghosts were still haunting them. From that day forward, the girls promised each other that they would never let fear control their lives. They would face their fears head on, and they would never let the ghost of the haunted mansion haunt them again. But every once in a while, as they walked past the old mansion, they couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. They knew that the ghosts were still there, waiting to be unleashed again. And they knew that they would never truly be able to forget the terrifying experience they had had that night.